This morning in our study of Revelation, I'd like to pose a question. When disaster strikes, when we're threatened, when we're afraid, when things feel like they're out of control, how do we respond? Difficult times often reveal our true core of beliefs, which is going to occur in a unique way in this passage in Revelation. Where we are in the timeline of Revelation is the seventh seal has been opened, and the scroll is now open, and there's 7 trumpets. The Antichrist has already revealed himself as being God, or claiming to be God, seating himself in the temple. And the 144,000 Israeli spiritual army has been sealed and now is, in the second half of the tribulation, leading people to Christ. And thus there's a great multitude from every nation going in heaven. But where we are is in the second half of the tribulation. So we've seen thus far we've seen the 5 trumpets. The 5th trumpet blast lasted for at least 5 months. The locusts last for 5 months. The first 4 trumpet blasts were directed towards nature. What we saw was a third of the vegetation was destroyed, which would affect food sources and animals. A third of the sea life and ships were destroyed. The next trumpet took away a third of the fresh water supply. And then the 4th trumpet, a third of the light or air quality was affected. Now these 4 first trumpets were directed at man's basic needs that were given by God and threatened. In these trumpets, the resources and stability that man has come to live on and find security in has been shaken. In the 5th trumpet we saw last week, we saw the hostile, demonic-influenced army harming those who are not God's people, those who weren't sealed, and those were in the form of locusts, a locust swarm and a plague, probably the largest swarm that ever existed. This was a massive attacking and painful force from the animal kingdom. And like the other trumpet blasts, they show that mankind is not as strong or secure as we think we are. And as horrific as the torturing, painful locusts were, that was just the first woe. We have to ask, what could be worse? These insects were influenced by demons and they brought about torment. This next woe are humans influenced by demons that bring about death. So things, in fact, do get worse. In Revelation 9:13 through 21, the 6th trumpet blasts out loud, revealing the plague of the 200 million. And in this passage, we're going to consider the cause and effect relationship of the sounding of the 6th trumpet. The cause is the plague itself of the 200 million, and the effect is the results of the plague on humanity. So let's start with the cause, which is the 6th trumpet's plague of 200 million, which is in verses 13 through 19. In verses 13 through 14, we see the source of the plague. So let's go ahead and read that whole text. Then the 6th angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the 4 horns of the golden altar, which is before God. One saying to the 6th angel who had the trumpet, release the 4 angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates. So here we have the 6th angel sounding his trumpet, and the response that happens is that a voice talks back to it, coming from the altar. Now the phrase is reminiscent of chapter 8, the beginning, right before the first trumpet is sounded, where starting in verse 3 it says, another angel came and stood at the altar of incense, holding a golden censer, and much incense was given to him, so that he might add it to the prayers of all the saints on the golden altar which is before the throne. And the smoke of the incense, which with the prayers of the saints, went up before God out of the angel's hand. So this golden altar of incense brings up and connects with chapter 8, the ideas of the prayers of the saints and the prayers that were added by these angels. And those prayers were that God would be merciful and delay his full wrath and full judgment, and in so doing, give plagues demonstrating his power, his might, in giving people a final opportunity to repent. This altar is the altar of incense, which in a map of the earthly temple is in the inside right before the division of the Holy of Holies. And it looks like this. Now notice in the text it says, a voice, it's singular, came from the four horns. Whose voice is this? It's not God's direct voice because it's coming from an altar and he is on a throne. The voice is not the saints because it commands the sixth angel to do something. What voice or whose voice this is an angel. And that angel is speaking for God, specifically because it commands that sixth angel. And it comes from the four horns. Now the horns on the altar show the power and strength of that altar. It signifies it, it symbolizes it. And that's where we have the prayers of the saints and of the angels going up before God. And the four specifically probably indicate the scope of the altar going in all four directions. And thus being worldwide, being everywhere. Now, is it a little bit odd that God speaks through an altar? Why doesn't it just speak through an angel? Or he speak just outright from the throne? Well, we've seen this before in Exodus, where God speaks through a burning bush before Moses. And in Acts 7, verse 30, and in verse 35, Luke records for us that that is actually an angel, that God speaks through an angel who speaks through the burning bush. So here too, it's an angel speaking for God, but he's speaking through the altar. Why? It's because that message and the instructions are connected with the altar, and specifically the prayers of the saints and the additional prayers of the angels. So the second oddity here we have is that the command of that voice that comes from the altar goes back to the sixth angel that just blew the trumpet. Now why is that? Well, that sixth angel is one of the seven archangels that stand before the throne of God. So he is extremely powerful. And what is he commanded or instructed to do? To go and release the four angels that are bound in the great river Euphrates. Now that river is located here. It goes up all the way up this direction. In modern day countries, it starts here, it goes through Iraq, goes through Syria, and into Turkey. And that location, that Euphrates River, in the Middle East, in that region, is the source out of which these four demons come. Now, these four demons are extremely powerful because it takes an archangel to go and release them. And probably it's that archangel that put them there in the first place. So they're in that river bound, which signifies that they're wicked. And they have to be bound or their wickedness would be devastating. Now, just like the four horns, notice there's four demons. And that's probably significant, showing that they, from that one location, go out into the four corners of the world. And thus their influence is worldwide. So why are they released? What are they going to do? What are they going to spread throughout the whole world? That brings us to the purpose of the plague, which is in verse 15. The text reads, "And the four angels who had been prepared for the hour and day and month and year were released, so that they would kill a third of mankind." Now first notice right in the beginning that they were prepared. It reminds us that God is sovereign in his plans, down to the very hour. Now we know he's down to the millisecond. Everything is planned out and going according to his exact plan. Now, but why would there be an emphasis about this happening at the proper time, the proper day, year, month? Why is there an emphasis here? It's rewritten because people will see the death that these demons are going to bring about. And they're going to wonder, how can God allow it? Or where is God? Are these demons running amok? Are they more powerful than God? No. God is in control of these things, and God is allowing them to bring about destructive ends. Satan's kingdom does not triumph, but God allows it. And God actually uses these sinful creatures to bring about judgment. And it's in this book that's telling us that this is going to happen beforehand. So when we see it, we can interpret it properly. Now, our world now has a lot of problems and a lot of destruction and a lot of death and a lot of evil. And as difficult as it might seem, looking at our world today, these 4 destructive angels are restrained or kept from our world. Meaning, things can get much worse. And in fact, they will for the people who are living in this tribulational period, when these demons will be released. It reminds us that we are blessed at the present, being shielded and protected from these incredibly harmful beings. And we really don't know all that we are protected from on a day-to-day basis, from the evil that is out there. We just don't know. But we need to be thankful for it until we do realize just how much God protects us. So what do these angels do? These 4 demons who are released, they're released in order that they would kill a third of mankind. This continues the theme of diminishing the resources and creation by a third. With the first 4 trumpets here, a third of humanity. And if numbers of today exist, that would equate to 2 billion people. Now, I know a quarter of the population has died in the first 4 seals, so the population of that time might be slightly less than it is today, or maybe more. But a good round number is 2 billion people will die. That is an amazingly large amount of people. The stench and diseases that will spread from the corpses that are too vast to bury will be everywhere. The whole world will be filled with the odor of death and decay. It will be a horrific time. How do these demons do it? How do they take a third of mankind away? We're told that in the description of the plague in verses 16 through 19. In verse 16, we read about what John hears. The text says, "The number of the armies of the horsemen was 200 million. I heard the number of them." Now, John has said this in the past, and I heard certain things. When he says, "I heard the number," it signifies that there's a report given in heaven. John's not counting the army and comes up to 200 million. An angel has reported that to the throne of God, and John hears it. This is an army gathered by those 4 demons that were just released. And now we read about in verses 17 through 19 what John saw. I'm going to read just the first verse, 17, which says, "And this is how I saw in the vision the horses and those who sat on them. The riders had breastplates the color of fire and of hyacinth and of brimstone. And the heads of the horses are like the heads of lions. And out of their mouth proceed fire and smoke and brimstone." So first I want to point out how John introduces this vision. He says, and this is how I saw in the vision the horses and those who sat on them. It seems that John is clarifying that this is strange. The image that he's seeing is not normal. It's not what he's used to. It doesn't correspond to normal horses and riders. And thus he's clarifying for us before he writes. It suggests that these are not literal horses with riders, but there's something else is going on. And although John is shown these strange horses that are doing strange things, it probably refers to something he just can't understand. that happens in the prophets. In Daniel 12, when Daniel is shown a certain vision, he asked, "What is that?" And the angel says in Daniel 12, "It's not for you to know." So same thing I believe is happening here. John is shown images that he can understand, but they're strange. They don't correspond to his reality of what horses normally do and riders, and he doesn't understand. So he's just saying, "I'm going to tell you what I saw, and it's kind of odd." So what does he see? He sees the riders with breastplates. Breastplates are going to signify armor for protection. Whatever these things are, they're well armored. And then the colors of them. The fire is going to signify bright red. The hyacinth is going to be a dark bluish gray. And brimstone is going to be a yellowish color. Then it says that the heads of the horses are like the heads of lions. Lion is a traditional first century or ancient world metaphor for strength and power, and of destructive power. We saw even the plague of locusts last week. Their mouths were like lions. So here, it's not saying that the heads are lions, but they're strong and powerful like lions. And out of their mouths proceed the fire, smoke, and brimstone. So the destructive forces are not from the lion's jaws or teeth. It comes out of the mouth. So notice how these three things, fire, smoke, and brimstone, correspond to the colors. Fire and smoke would correspond to the hyacinth, to the dark blue, grayish color, and the brimstone is brimstone. So what that signifies is that these colors are not any flags or any kind of identifying markers of a country or a force, but they indicate the sole purpose of these vehicles and riders, that they are designed for one purpose, to bring about this destruction. So the question we have to ask here is, could these represent some form of modern vehicle of war with modern weaponry? The answer is most likely yes. And why is that the case? Well, there's 4 reasons why. First, John sees this vision as being awfully strange, and he can't explain it. Number 2, horses do not project things out of their mouths. The other 2 reasons are in verse 18 and 19. So let's move on to those verses. Let's read them first. Verse 18, a third of mankind was killed by these 3 plagues, by the fire and the smoke and the brimstone which proceeded out of their mouths. For the power of the horses is in their mouths and in their tails. And their tails are like serpents and have heads. And with them they do harm. The third reason these are probably not literal horses is that the projectiles out of these horses' mouths cause much death. Now these 3 things may not be separated. They might be connected. Brimstone could cause the fire, which could cause the smoke, which all 3 contributed to the deaths of people. Or they can be all separate, referring to 3 different kinds of weapons that the vehicle of war has on it and projects out and brings harm. And the 4th reason why these are probably not literal horses but more of a modern weapon is that they're tails. Horses don't have tails that are like snakes. The tails that are on the backside of these vehicles are secondary weapons. Now the text is emphatic that the heads are the main weapon to bring the main death. But the secondary weapon or a minor weapon is in the back end, and it's described as being very quick and deadly as serpents. So now what we have to be on guard by is that this image is very difficult to understand. It is hard to know what this refers to. Does it refer to a tank, another vehicle of war, a helicopter, a jet, a destroyer ship? All of those things are irrelevant, and they shouldn't be done, because this is going to happen in our time, in 100 years from now. When is this going to happen?